You ready? Listen up, because what you've been taught about one God, no others, might be half the story. Psalm 82 kicks open a cosmic courtroom door that most preachers quietly keep shut. It's not bedtime story theology, it is raw, confrontational, and it forces you to stare at spiritual realities churches often refuse to name. Picture this: God takes a stand in the assembly of gods. The text doesn't dodge plural. It says in the midst of the gods he executes judgment. That's not metaphorical fluff. That's divine confrontation, a supreme deity judging other deities in a heavenly court. The shock is supposed to jolt your worldview. What are these other gods? And why is Yahweh calling them to account? Let me walk you through it, point by point, and you're going to feel every tension in the text. You'll see that the monotheism you've been sold often hacks off half the battlefield. From the first verse, the language floors you. God has taken his place in the divine council, in the midst of the gods he holds judgment. That's not God among men, that's God among gods. The Hebrew uses Elohim, plurals, in multiple layers. The singular God, Yahweh, stands in assembly with other Elohim. He doesn't casually mention it, he positions himself in that court. That is a claim, he is supreme among a council. He is judge over other spiritual beings. He's not negotiating, he's presiding. Those other Elohim are not left anonymous. Verse 2 spills bile: how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? They are being called out publicly for corruption, favoritism, injustice. These aren't distant ideas, it's a cosmic indictment. And verse 5 says, they have neither knowledge nor understanding, they walk on in darkness. So these gods are not omniscient. They are busted. They failed. They were appointed, or empowered, but they missed the mark. Then verse 6 slaps you harder. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Who says to others, you are gods? The supreme God does. And yet the next line, nevertheless, you shall die like men. That is a sentence. They are judged as immortals but sentenced as mortals. They had status, they had power, but they are not exempt. They fall. They decay. They get torn down. Verse 8, arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Underneath that petition is cosmic power play. Because if Yahweh is dispossessing these gods and claiming their nations, that means those gods once held dominion, territory, authority over nations. And Yahweh is saying, your time is over. This isn't soft-spoken symbolism. This is divine overthrow. It is judgment in the heavens. It is dethronement. Now, there are voices screaming, they're just human judges, mere mortals called gods metaphorically. That dodge is soft. It tries to protect monotheism by minimizing the text. But it collapses under scrutiny. Why? Because the text calls them sons of the Most High, a title reserved for spiritual beings, and says they die like men. If they are men, dying is redundant. If they are gods, dying means they lose their divinity. The text treats them as spiritual players with real jurisdiction, not human officials. Also, how do you call a human God and still expect the audience to quake in spiritual terror? That would be theater, not truth. The assertion you are gods comes from a place of authority over spiritual beings. Let me be blunt, when the text calls them gods, we cannot wave it off. If you deny their being, you new to the text. You remove conflict from heaven. You reduce the spiritual war to sin in your heart. And that's inadequate. The raw text invites war. Michael Heiser and others argue that the plural Elohim here are actual divine beings, created, real, with delegated authority over nations, but corrupted. The church has often silenced this view because it unsettles comfortable theology. Because if you admit other gods, you open doors. But the text forces open those doors anyway. In the ancient Near East worldview, cosmic councils were common. Deities convened, made decrees, challenged one another. Psalm 82 is not writing in a vacuum. It's embedded in that matrix. Yahweh's act of judgment in a divine council is him asserting supremacy in the very language of those cultures. He uses their map against them, exposing their failures. That's bold, dangerous, raw. So you have a divine courtroom. You have defendants who were meant to rule nations. You have a judge who's no respecter of persons, even spiritual persons. You have a verdict, you will die. You have a policy shift, the nations will pass into Yahweh's hands. All of this in a single psalm. Yahweh stands in judgment among gods. But a battlefield this raw invites defenders, and there are three major camps fighting to redefine or neutralize the threat. I'm going to walk you through each camp, expose their weak spots, and force you to face which one holds up to the text. I'll do this straight, you'll see where the smoke screens are. Camp A, the human magistrate interpretation. This is the default position in many traditional circles. The gods are just judges, rulers, human authorities elevated metaphorically. It's convenient. It preserves strict monotheism. It tucks away the supernatural conflict so pastors don't have to wrestle with spiritual war. But it's riddled with contradictions. First, if these gods are merely human rulers, how do you explain being called sons of the Most High with divine titles? The text doesn't say you are judges of men, it says you are gods. It uses language proper to spiritual beings. To treat it as mere metaphor is a forced emotion. And second, these gods are charged with walking in darkness, lacking knowledge, showing partiality, failing justice across nations. That scope is cosmic, not municipal. This is not a parking ticket you hand out to a crooked judge. The human interpretation tries to shrink the language into mundane human wrongdoing, but the text itself refuses to shrink. Another blow, in verse 8, the psalmist petitions God to judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. That suggests a redistribution of power over nations, something earthly judges never wielded to begin with. That line presupposes that these gods controlled nations that Yahweh is now repossessing. If you call them only humans, you render verse 8 mysterious or symbolic, and you break the internal consistency of the psalm. Thus, the human judge's camp depends on undercutting the force of divine language. It's defensive theology, not honest exegesis. Camp B, the hybrid representative model. This one says, all right, maybe these gods are spiritual in some sense, but their power is derivative. They're celestial agents or delegated spirits tied to nations, not full deities. They act as administrators, and when they fail, God pronounces judgment. This is a middle ground, seemingly safer, but it carries its own risks and ambiguities. Proponents argue this avoids collapsing into full polytheism. You don't affirm multiple ultimate gods, just subordinates. But the moment you place spiritual agents with real authority over nations, you've opened the gates to a multi-tiered cosmology. This is no longer simple world, we now have a hierarchy of spiritual rulers, fallen or corrupted. The hybrid view often leans on passages like Deuteronomy 32 verse 8, in some textual traditions, which speak of nations being allocated according to the number of the gods. That gives a framework. These lesser gods once had roles controlling nations, then failed, then God intervened. But that theory only works if you accept textual variants and ancient Near Eastern cosmology. It forces you into debates over manuscript reliability and comparative mythology, which many churches don't want to wade into. More importantly, hybridity creates inconsistency in the psalm itself. If these gods were only administrators, why does Yahweh say they die like men? If their authority is derived, how can they be expected to meet divine standards of knowledge and justice? Delegated authority implies limits, yet the psalm treats them as if they had full jurisdiction to be held accountable. That's not partial power, that's real power. So hybrid models often wobble under pressure. They try to have divine accountability without divine status, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. Camp C, the full divine being's interpretation, divine council theology. This is the view that refuses to water down the text. It says, yes, the gods are spiritual beings, actual members of a divine council, once placed in authority, now judged for corruption. This is the most controversial, but it fits the text best because it respects the language, tension, cosmic scale, and structure of Psalm 82. In this model, you read Psalm 82 as an open window into cosmic governance. The gods were real, operating in their spheres, failing their mandates. Yahweh is not negotiating or posturing, he is presiding over divine beings, passing sentence. That reading forces the church to admit spiritual conflict is real, the unseen is not metaphor. Check this, scholars like Michael Heiser insist that to truncate gods into humans is to weaken Christology itself, because in John 10, Jesus quotes "You are gods" from Psalm 82 as a judicial precedent in the spiritual realm. If gods there were only men, the force of Jesus' argument collapses. Heiser argues that the divine plurality in the text is essential to maintain coherence. The plural Elohim in Psalm 82 is no accident, it is deliberate. The syntax demands a plurality of divine beings over whom Yahweh reigns supreme. This view draws on the ancient Near Eastern understanding of divine council. Many cultures believed gods convened, made decrees, had domains. Psalm 82 isn't contradicting that worldview, it is subverting and redirecting it under Yahweh's sovereignty. Also, in Psalm 89 and other passages, you find echoes of divine council language, the witness of other heavenly beings, sons of God, host of heaven. You can't read Psalm 82 in isolation. In that extended semantic field, full divine being's interpretation aligns with the broader biblical cosmos. Now, let's not sugarcoat it, this model unsettles traditional theology. It demands recognition of multiple spiritual entities with authority, making room for cosmic rebellion, making God's sovereignty more dramatic. It forces the believer to see that salvation, justice, and redemption might have ramifications far beyond flesh and blood. The gods here are not props, they are actors, defendants, casualties in divine war. Even some church fathers, like Origen and Jerome, entertain divine council reading, seeing Psalm 82's gods as angels in a celestial assembly. That's not fringe, that is ancient precedent trying to drag theology into the real spiritual arena. But over time, the institutional church has sanitized these views, reduced spiritual warfare to moral allegory. Now let me be explicit with you, both the human and hybrid interpretations falter because they attempt to neuter language they cannot contain. They shrink cosmic tension into moral stories. They treat cosmic powers as powerless metaphors. The full divine interpretation is the only one that respects the biblical text's raw force. Psalm 82 challenges you at the linguistic level. Elohim is the pivot. It's a plural form, yet often used with singular verbs. It's flexible in meaning, could refer to God, gods, divine powers, judges, supernatural beings. You cannot treat it as if Hebrew were English with fixed categories. The text toys with grammar, and any interpreter must wrestle with that chaos, not ignore it. Here's the trap many fall into: they see Elohim and think God automatically. But Hebrew grammar allows a plural noun to take a singular verb, a plural of majesty or plural of intensity, and that is used when Elohim refers to the one God. But in Psalm 82, you have Elohim used more than once, in positions and constructions that demand plurality. The first appearance of Elohim in verse 1 is tied to a singular verb, stands, that's Yahweh. The second Elohim is tied to the verb judges, plural sense, the gods being judged. The text exploits the shift. This double use is not sloppy writing, it is rhetorical precision. One Elohim is the judge, singular, the other Elohim are the judged, plural. That grammar switch is built intentionally. It forces you to see a plurality of beings under judgment. If you try to collapse both uses into the same meaning, you lose the rhetorical tension. You make the psalm a bland moral text, not a cosmic drama. Now, defenders of the human judge reading seize on instances where Elohim is translated to judges, like in Exodus 22 verse 8 or 21:6. Yes, Elohim is used of human judges elsewhere, but context is king. In those texts, Elohim is parallel with a known human institution. It carries humility, jurisdiction limited to people. But in Psalm 82, Elohim is not parallel to human courts, the court is divine. The accused are gods, not men, and are treated as spiritual beings. To drag the Exodus usage into Psalm 82 is category mistake, mixing contexts, stretching analogies. Another weak move, claiming that Elohim is purely abstract divinity, a generic divine quality, not discrete beings. Some scholars suggest Elohim can mean a divine power or the realm of the sacred. That is convenient, you avoid admitting other beings with agency. But that reading fails the pressure test. Why then does the text speak of their failure, their injustice, their death? Abstract divinity doesn't make partiality to the wicked or dying like men coherent. A concept can't die. Agency can. The psalm talks like there were persons, corrupt executives in cosmic roles. You don't hold an abstraction accountable. You judge persons. Let me expose the fatal flaw in that abstract divinity gambit. Psalm 82 isn't a theology class, it's a courtroom drama. It names defendants, charges crimes, pronounces sentence. You can't shove that into an abstract idea. You need real defendants, beings who hold power, break it, pay for it. Some interpreters backpedal and claim, perhaps Elohim here is intentionally ambiguous, half symbolic, half real, an intentional mix. But that is the asylum of weak exegesis. You can't accept ambiguity when the text demands clarity. A psalm built to shock you must convey identity. You don't let the ambiguity swallow the message. We also must handle the claim, Hebrew has no true plural for deity, that plural form is honorific or plural of majesty. That is true in many cases. But in Psalm 82, the text doesn't treat Elohim as majestic singular. It treats them as plural, failing, corruptible. That is incompatible with a plural of majesty reading. The majesty plural idea only works when the plural noun is consistently paired with singular verbs and the surrounding context reinforces unity. Here, you see plural behavior. You see failure, you see death, you see redistribution of nations. Majesty can't die, and majestic unity doesn't fracture. We must also examine semantic range. Elohim is used not only of God or gods but also of angels, spiritual beings, even human rulers, depending on context. But the principle is, context defines meaning, not default. In a courtroom scene set in the heavens, under divine judgment, the Elohim on trial fit best as supernatural beings with delegated authority, not metaphorical humans. Any interpretation that ignores context kills fidelity. Then there's the textual tension. Psalm 82 appears to reflect an older cultural backdrop where nations had gods or spiritual patrons. It borrows the language of divine counsel and turns it into a moment of cosmic purge. These gods failed, now I take their nations. That background gives weight to reading Elohim as real beings. If you reject that backdrop, you have to sanitize biblical history arbitrarily. Every time a theologian glosses over Elohim, they kneecap theology. Because Elohim is the door into cosmic zoning. If you accept that Elohim can refer to other divine agents, you can't reduce spiritual conflict to a human moral fight. If you deny that here, you cheapen the psalm into a civic justice speech. In Psalm 82, Elohim is not passive. It acts. It rules. It fails. It is judged. You can't treat it as inert symbol. The grammar, the semantic load, the drama all push in one direction. There are beings under Yahweh's scrutiny, beings whose cosmic roles were real, and now they stand indicted. If you're walking into this video as a viewer who's heard only one God, nothing else, this part is designed to punch that illusion in the face. The language demands more. The logic demands more. And if your belief system can't handle that, you've been operating on theological training wheels. You've seen how Psalm 82 names and judges gods. Now let me pull back and expose what that means for authority, nations, cosmic structure, the dark architecture behind power itself. If those gods are real beings with delegated authority, their failure changes everything. We're not just talking theology, we're talking cosmic regime change. Those other gods were not spectators. They had territorial assignments. There is a textual thread in Deuteronomy 32 verse 8, in some textual traditions, that when the Most High apportioned the nations, he did so according to the number of the sons of God, meaning territories under spiritual rulers. That means control of nations was parceled out among divine agents. Those agents became gods of nations. But in Psalm 82, they have defaulted. They broke the deal. They proved unworthy. Their reigns were unjust. They showed favoritism. They neglected the oppressed. They lack knowledge. That's not symbolism. That's administrative failure. Now Yahweh steps in to repossess what they misruled. Think about that. Nations were not orphans spiritually. They had patrons, spiritual overlords tasked with justice, order, and allegiance to Yahweh's standards. But when they betrayed their mandate, the cosmic landlord, Yahweh, evicts them. Hence, arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. That's not poetic flourish, that is cosmic reclamation. The psalmist isn't praying for moral revival, he is demanding a regime change in the cosmos. So when a god fails, Yahweh doesn't shrug, he deposes. He strips authority. He repossesses the nations. This is cosmic foreclosure, spiritual eviction. The text demands that the divine authority structure be rebooted. That means every battle, every injustice on earth, is a symptom of corrupted godhood above. Now, if your theology treats spiritual warfare like fairy tales and your politics like secular clutter, you've got it backwards. Psalm 82 places warfare in the heavenly court, with cosmic shifts cascading down to earth. The nations are territories in a spiritual map. When the gods assigned to those territories fail, their lands become vulnerable to chaos, injustice, and tyranny. The only remedy? Yahweh steps into judicial takeover. That's what Psalm 82 demands. Let's be clearer, the Psalm's indictment lists failure modes, showing partiality to wicked, neglecting fatherless, oppressed, needy. These responsibilities are not optional. These gods had to deliver justice. They were trustees. When they failed, their tenants, the nations, suffered. That gives us a template. Injustice in the world is not just human failure, it is spiritual delegation gone rogue. The psalm holds these gods responsible for structural injustice across nations. Furthermore, the demand that Yahweh inherit all nations is not metaphor. It means the existing spiritual lords are stripped. The nation's spiritual title deed is rescinded. Yahweh becomes the ultimate landlord again, reassigning or ruling directly. The cosmic courtroom decision is binding across dimensions. Because of this, any view that reduces all conflict to human choices is bankrupt. Conflict, injustice, suffering, they aren't just human, they are echoes of a rejected spiritual order. The gods failed the cosmic trust. The result, humans drown in the spiritual mess. But it's not original. It's structural collapse above. Now let's talk about the dark consequences. If these gods once had authority, then evil is not just rebellion from nothing, it is betrayal from trusted agents. Not demons lurking randomly, but former custodians turned corrupt. That means evil has inside jobs. It's not random chaos, it's rogue governance. The darkness is bureaucratic. It's organized. It's hierarchical. Psalm 82 hints at a fall from prestige, from responsibility, from cosmic office. They didn't just sin, they failed to steward authority. Recognize, once those gods are deposed, there is a vacuum. Cosmic disorder seeps downward. Nations go lawless, oppression spreads, might makes right. That's the spiritual fallout of cosmic failure. Psalm 82 is the clearing of the wreckage. Yahweh moves in to repair, rebuild, reassign, but only after the house cleaning. Because of this, the question is no longer why is there evil, but which spiritual regimes allowed it. If nations are spiritual domains, then intercession, spiritual warfare, prophetic decree, they have teeth. They connect to cosmic judgment. You can't treat prayer as therapy, it becomes participation in cosmic court procedure. One more angle, when Yahweh judges these gods, he does so from his throne. He presides. It's judicial sovereignty, not negotiation, not compromise. The one seated is not equal to those judged. That's monotheistic supremacy in raw form. Yahweh is highest judge and overthrows lesser gods who dared misrule. That is sovereignty that pierces cosmic structures. Now look, some will quibble. Are we saying there are gods that compete with Yahweh? No. Psalm 82 places them under his authority. They failed. They're judged. They are not equal. But yes, they existed in delegated authority. That is radical, but the text demands it. To deny that is to absorb reality into a sanitized monotheism that erases the battlefield. Most Christian systems treat Psalm 82 like an embarrassing footnote. They build doctrine as though cosmic courts never mattered. But hiding is not argument. I'm going to show you exactly where the traditional theological apparatus fights back and fails. Because if you follow the resistance, you find out why the text is more radical than most dare admit. First, denial by omission. Many churches simply ignore the psalm in sermons on spiritual warfare or justice. They'll preach sin, repentance, love, forgiveness, but they'll skip the cosmic courtroom where gods are judged. That omission is not benign, it's suppression. The grand narrative of divine sovereignty makes Psalm 82 uncomfortable because it forces frameworks to expand. So it's quarantined to footnotes, not integrated into doctrine. Second, the rhetorical move of allegorizing. These gods are merely symbols for human institutions, for ideologies, for sin power. That's a classic safety valve. But allegory dissolves force. If the gods are symbols, they carry no agency. They can't fail responsibilities, they can't be punished. The courtroom scene becomes moral theater. The text, full of drama and demand, is reduced to illustration. That's theological self-defense, not honest engagement. Third, appeal to tradition. Some argue, church fathers never taught divine council theology, so we must not go there. That argument is backward. Truth doesn't owe allegiance to institutional comfort. The fact that much of Christian tradition erased or sanitized divine counsel shows cultural pressure, not textual supremacy. Tradition that silences conflict is tradition that fears cosmic accountability. Fourth, fear of sliding into polytheism. This is the hammer over every theologian's head. If you accept other divine beings, doesn't that make them gods alongside Yahweh? That's the scare tactic. But the more accurate reading, they're subordinate beings under Yahweh's judgment. Recognizing their existence doesn't dilute monotheism, it enforces Yahweh's supremacy over spiritual multitudes. The fear is rhetorical, not exegetical. Fifth, the heresy trap, hinting that acknowledging these gods is dangerous, that believers might slide into worshipping them. That accusation is a guardrail to shut down inquiry. But denying their existence doesn't make your faith safer, it makes your vision smaller. The trap silences critical thinking. The stronger move is to affirm their existence under judgment, not to deny them. That keeps the arena intact. Sixth, theological flattening, making all spiritual beings reduced to angels or demons, lumped into a single binary. This is intellectual laziness. If gods in Psalm 82 had administrative spheres, jurisdictions, responsibilities, then they're not generic demons. They are structured, differentiated actors. Flattening erases nuance, robs theological imagination, and ultimately misreads the cosmic complexity the text demands. Seventh, compartmentalize and accept divine counsel in Old Testament mythic language, but deny its relevance for New Testament, Christian doctrine, or today. That tactic is fragmented theology, like admitting a side story but refusing to integrate it. But Jesus, Paul, and the New Testament language echo cosmic conflict, principalities, spiritual rulers. To isolate Psalm 82 as archaic myth is to deny continuity in the biblical narrative. Eighth, theological minimalism, reduce spiritual warfare to personal temptation, internal demons, individual healing, and refuse to see ideological or national spiritual battles. That is shrinking the battlefield. It's a form of spiritual infantilism. Psalm 82 demands that kingdoms, nations, systems themselves are subject to divine audit. The minimalists can't stomach that. So they narrow the vision to personal religion. They neuter the psalm by ignoring scale. Ninth, selective hermeneutic privilege, using proof texting elsewhere to establish doctrine, but then exempting Psalm 82 from normal rules of exegesis because it's poetic. It's just Hebrew poetry, don't press it. That claim is a dodge. Yes, poetry uses metaphor, but when poetry acts like a courtroom scene with real actors, you can't shove it into comforting ambiguity. The Psalm's legal force demands consistent hermeneutics, not exceptions. 10th, theological comfort zone. Many believers want a God who is kind, personal, safe. Psalm 82's drama, its cosmic stakes, its harsh judgment, that kind of theology rattles the pew. So systems are built to buffer the tension. You domesticate Psalm 82 so it doesn't rock the boat. But Scripture isn't here to protect your comfort zone, it's here to expose cosmic realities. You're still here. Good, because now we step into the hot zone. We peel away the last safe layers and expose the controversy, the pushback, the history of censorship, the battlefield of belief. This is where Psalm 82 stops being nice theology and becomes a spiritual fistfight. First, let's talk history of suppression. From early church centuries, many Christian writers avoided or sanitized Psalm 82's language of gods in assembly. Augustine, in his exposition, turned the gods into earthly judges, steering the dramatic tension into allegory. The cosmic courtroom becomes moral exhortation, reducing extraordinary powers to mortal magistrates. That shift was strategic. It tames the text. It neutralizes conflict. And over centuries, that tame framework became default. We lost the edge. We slit the wings of Psalm 82 so it no longer threatens us. Jump forward to modern times, the rise of conservative evangelicalism, the dominance of systematic theology focused on abstract doctrine, not cosmic realism. The divine counsel model advanced by scholars like Michael Heiser stirred the waters, some embraced it, many rejected it. Critics accuse it of destabilizing monotheism, leaning too heavily on ancient Near Eastern parallels, or fueling speculative theology. But many such criticisms are reflexive, they reject proposals before actually engaging the text. The rejection often starts from fear, not from exegetical contradiction. There's heated debate. Heiser's defenders say he recovers a neglected dimension of Scripture, restoring lost territory about spiritual governance. Opponents say he smuggles in polytheistic language, that his methodology is too speculative, that he makes theology too cosmic. Some say he ends up deifying believers, or blurring lines between creator and creature. These accusations are fierce, especially in religious communities that guard doctrinal borders tightly. One major flashpoint is Jesus quoting Psalm 82 in John 10 verse 34, "Is it not written, I said, you are gods?" Heiser and others assert Jesus appeals to a precedent about spiritual beings. Detractors argue Jesus was using the gods equals earthly judges reading accepted in Jewish interpretation to defend his claim, not endorsing cosmic plurality. That becomes a crucible, whose interpretive path holds up. Then there's the textual battleground. Deuteronomy 32 verse 8, in the Dead Sea Scrolls and Septuagint versions, speaks of nations being apportioned according to the number of the gods or sons of God. That reading supports a world where spiritual rulers had territory. Critics point out that this variant is contested. Mainstream Hebrew Masoretic text reads "sons of Israel." So reliance on variant manuscripts exposes this entire framework to textual suspicion. If your cornerstone relies on disputed texts, enemies have ammo. We also must admit that in many church traditions, the cosmic realm is pushed to the margins. The dominant spiritual worldview is anthropocentric, humanity is center stage, spiritual beings are scary extras, barely acknowledged. That mindset biases interpreters against Psalm 82's cosmic claims. The default assumption is, God plus humans only, anything else is spiritual fluff. That bias bars engagement. Next, methodological risk. To read Psalm 82 as cosmic courtroom assumes comparative theology, you must map ancient Near Eastern data, divine councils, ANE gods, into biblical reading. Critics argue that when you lean on external mythology too heavily, you risk mythologizing the Bible. The text has to stand on its own. If your case depends significantly on external analogies, you build on shifting sand. Another contested zone: speculation escalation. Once you admit multiple gods, questions snowball. How many? What ranks? How did they fall? When did territory transfer? Did they rebel? What's their current status? Some interpretations spiral into speculative cosmologies, gleaming with imaginative power, but lacking textual constraint. That's why many theologians hesitate. They see the path, then see the abyss of speculation. But here's the reality: any reading that avoids cosmic implications is also speculative, speculation that nothing real is going on overhead. You either accept spiritual realism or assume zero spiritual structure. There is no neutral middle. Denial is as much presupposition as affirmation. Consider the risk of heresy labeling. In conservative circles, anyone who suggests other gods is often branded unorthodox. The pushback is fierce: you're opening the door to Arianism, Gnosticism, pantheism. That slander is a guardrail. It intimidates theologians into safety. But aggressive doctrinal policing doesn't disprove Psalm 82, it hides it. You want illustrations? Look at blogs and critiques accusing Heiser's work of Gnostic heresy or that he elevates man to gods. The tone is often fearful, dismissive, not engaged. Detractors often argue from tradition or from preserving doctrine, not from grappling with Psalm 82's text. That pattern tells you something about power. Text that threatens structure often gets attacked reflexively. Also, academic theology often isolates the Old Testament as archaic religious literature, disconnected from spiritual reality. When Psalm 82 is thrown back into that isolated bracket, its force is defanged. You reduce it to historical theology, not living revelation. So many read it like they read mythology: interesting, exotic, irrelevant. That treatment denies the Psalm's claim to cosmic authority. And yet, we lack neutrality. Every interpretive move is loaded. The safe path has dominated for centuries. But the question is, do you let centuries of filtered tradition decide the meaning, or do you let the text judge your tradition? Thanks for staying to the end. Thank you to every viewer who endured the tension, the heavy ideas, the cosmic courtroom drama. I appreciate your courage to look this deep. You rock.